Wednesday, everybody. It's January 18th at 3 o'clock in Boston, Massachusetts. And we're really happy to have everybody on another Teikametrics roundtable. My name is Andy Coughlin, and I'm the CRO here over at Teikametrics. And I'm going to attempt to be your host and your MC for this very exciting session. As some of you do know, we try to host a webinar, every couple of weeks with topics that are relevant to this audience. We've tried over the last several months to, in some ways, just kind of stop talking and really listen to our customers and what, the world of e-commerce sellers are wanting to hear, and gather our expertise not only here at Teikametrics, but also reach out to partners and bring in the right folks to have just a really good, robust conversation about things that matter to you all. So we're excited for another roundtable series. We've got a great group of folks around the table today. We literally are just sitting around, it's not a round table, but it is quite a large rectangle shaped table. So some folks from the team are here. We've also are very lucky to have Mark Fagianno, who is the founder and CEO of TaxJar. We purposely named this webinar, why January and February are your most important FBA selling months, in large part because of all the tax implications that this audience is facing, but also a lot of the changes that we're seeing from Amazon. And given the strong relationship that we have with Amazon as a partner, and as I mentioned before with Mark and TaxJar, and the fact that we've been doing it for a number of years, we thought there'd be some good information to share. And of course, as I said before, we're listening to what the audience, what you all are asking to learn about. So we've got Roberta Foster, who is our sales director here. She's been around Teikametrics for nearly 3.5 years, almost 4 years. Yonny Reichel, who is an e-commerce analyst and one of our customer care champions. And as I mentioned before, Mark will be joining us later in the conversation. So here we are. So everybody, welcome. Thanks again for joining, and I'll pass over to Roberta to get things started.
Thanks, Andy. And don't forget to mention that we have a coupon code at the end for our partner TaxJar, so hang around for that. So one of the reasons why January and February are so important is because the sales spike isn't over yet. We get a lot of the feedback we've been getting from our clients is, isn't November and December one of the most important months? That is true, but there's a lot of things that's coming up in January and February that you need to be ready for. What we have here is a depiction of this trend. January could be just as big, or sometimes, depending on the category, even bigger than December. There are a lot of customers buying goods with their gift cards. It's peak season for winter gear if you're selling ski or snowboarding products. And it's also really big for anybody that has anything to do with New Year's resolutions. So if you're in the supplement category, if you're selling apparel or fitness gear, this is actually your most important month.
So Roberta, as a seller, how do you react? I mean, what do you do with that type of situation? If you know that January is going to be big, what should you do?
Yeah, so there's a couple different actions that you can take. I would first start by actually segmenting your inventory and break it up what I would call your new and your old investments. Whatever you have projected and invested in to actually sell during January and February, keep track of those investments, make sure they're selling, track your days of inventory on your inventory turns, which Yonny will get into later in the presentation, and see, are you on track or are you overstocked to sell these goods? Then what I would do is I'd look at your older investments. So anything that you have left over from your holiday buys and your goods that haven't sold when you thought they were, what's overstocked and what's stale. Take those goods and actually leverage this traffic to turn them over and to free up some of that capital. So to get those slower moving items to sell, you can try lowering the prices, you can try running promotions, do buy one, get one, or utilize some of the promotions that Amazon has, like lightning deals.
And what about forecasting? I mean, that's one of the toughest things with being an FBA seller is actually taking the risk when you need to and making the right bets at the right time. I mean, how do you do that if you're using the month before or trailing sales? In January you're using that's December. So what do you do to predict how much inventory to put into FBA?
That's a really great question, and this can be one of the hardest times to forecast for. So what we usually recommend doing is to use as much data as you possibly can. Look at your yearly and your historical trends and see, what sold really well this time last year. How much of a dip or a spike did you have depending on your category from December to January? Did you sell seasonal items? So it could be extremely variable, but my top tip would be to actually use as much data as you can and then use your knowledge. You are the expert in your group of products, and take that and you know what's trendy or what's not trendy for this coming
So this
months.
is one of the only months where you're actually going to use data from last year. It's probably the most important time to reference last year's volume.
Yeah, I would say so.
Because you don't really have anything to compare.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing that we're seeing is just Amazon, increasing its dominance. Today they announced that they're releasing a credit card. All of these Amazon Prime devices that people have got for Christmas, gift cards are huge. So I think we're seeing the largest increase in traffic through to January. I think Amazon even sent out an email to its sellers referencing, how important January is. The tough thing though is just not having the information to take the risk, and I think a lot of people just don't put enough inventory in, and I think we've been seeing that, right? We've had
a lot of sellers are suffering from stockouts, and stockouts are bad because obviously you miss that revenue and profit. But if you are the only one selling that product, or you're the brand of that, and you're the only one on the listing, you're actually hurting your conversion rate and your sales rank, which is calculated every hour. So every hour you're out of stock is really crucial.
Yeah.
Another thing that's huge in January and February is returns. So we're going to go over a few tips of how to handle these. And what you're looking at here and how to kind of track to see if you've had a spike in returns. You can actually log into Seller Central, go to your sales and traffic report, and see your refund rate. So you can log in there. Refunds.
So all of the products that you've been selling all through December, I mean, we're still dealing with, right? This is a sort of outstanding concern that every seller has as we speak. How many returns am I still going to get all the way back from Cyber Monday?
Yeah, Amazon is so customer centric that they want to make it as easy as possible for customers to buy goods and feel confident and be able to return them. So all of those holiday sales that you had, don't count your eggs before they hatch. The consumers or Amazon customers still have till February 1st to return those goods. So you should see those returns coming in, and they're going to still come in up until the 1st. So there's a few ways that you can see, what type of returns you've been having. One thing that we like to start with is actually to go and gain context of the situation and look at your historical trends. See where your return rate has been in the past. So when you look at this year's, you know what to compare it to. So this is actually going to be a great place for a poll to poll the audience and see, what have your return rates been in the past. If you want to launch that poll.
Looks like the early read is about 53% of the voters, if you will, are referencing between 1 and 10%. Now, how does that sound to you, Roberta, in terms of your, kind of experience? Is that low? Is that high?
Yeah, so it's very variable depending upon what category you sell in. And we all know that, I've done this myself. You order shoes on Amazon and you order 2 pairs because you're not sure, which size you are. So we'll see categories like shoes and apparel have a lot higher returns. And then, some categories will have a little bit lower. So it depends.
What's tough about that, in those apparel categories, Amazon is applying the FBA fee, the same FBA fee that was outbound back onto the return. So you paid twice as a seller.
Yeah.
So if you think about that and your return rate is in, the double digits, you're actually having to factor that in twice. So it's just very, very concerning. It's
such an important point out. I'm going to amplify it, right? If we look a little deeper here now that the poll results or the poll is closed, 30% of the audience didn't even calculate returns.
Wow.
Right? So it's such a good thing to to at least understand
Yeah.
that, gosh, not only do you got to think about, hey, I got to calculate it some way, which I know, Roberta, you're going to touch on that,
Mm-hmm.
but you're getting it on the way out, in the way in, and on the way out. Right, so it just starts to eat away. I know, Roberta, you talk about this quite a bit. Just the kind of these little rats and mice that are eating away at your profit.
Yeah.
Right?
Because the mindset is, I think, for a seller to think about 2017, the future. Like let's just sell more. And I think Amazon, unfortunately, has a bit of a vested interest in that same logic because they're
anytime a box moves, they get paid.
Exactly. So I think that's the real tough challenge with the mindset of just let's go and sell more. But it still hasn't finished yet, to
Right.
Roberta's point.
So what you can do is you can actually analyze your returns, and we recommend analyzing it on a cohort basis. And what that means is just allocating the returns you're getting back to the date that the item was actually purchased. So you want to see if you sold everything on Cyber Monday or right before Christmas, how many of those goods were actually returned. So we have a list here of reports you can go through in Seller Central and track those. And as Alistair mentioned, it's good. You need to go see what fees Amazon's charging you for these returns. So they're taking the percentage of an item's price, and it depends. The fee will also depend on the condition of the item.
And those restocking fees are coming out of your January settlement reports. So, and that's Roberta's point on a cohort. I mean, a cohort, you want to look at all of the orders that have shipped out of FBA in December and match them to the returns for those orders. Whereas the settlement report, Amazon pays you and takes those refunds out, the returns out of your January settlement. So it's actually quite hard to match it up. So I think it's a really good point about the cohort.
Yeah.
So sorry, just I know you're going to get into this the profitability of the returns calculator. But for the audience, knowing that you've got up to 45 days, you mentioned it before, right?
Mm-hmm.
February 1st. What guidance do you have, do we have as a company how do you feel good about doubling down in November, December, so you don't have out of stocks, right? But knowing you're not actually going to be able to reconcile until, the biggest part of your year until February 1st. Like, how do you balance that? I mean that's why these months are so important, right?
I mean, I think this really benefits sellers that are data driven. I mean, you're going to look at things like what was your return rate previous year. You will actually start to profile product lines that have more specific returns, and you see this all the time. Footwear, for example, just taking that example, some shoe styles are going to have a much higher return rate. So it's the sellers that can segment all of the different product types or supplier types, whether you're private label or reselling, and start to look at those patterns. What's going to happen? Those patterns are going to be amplified in December. They're going to be the same percentages typically, just a lot larger numbers. So I think it's looking at studying your data is going to give you the ability to make the adjustment going into December to make the right decision.
Historic data and then looking forward, category specific, right?
But it's difficult to do because Amazon's not giving you the data to segment in Seller Central, and they're also creating this imbalance of the returns are coming up to 45 days later. So you need to sort of pivot table if you're using Excel to get those two together.
Yeah, and a lot of you are probably asking yourself right now, am I actually making a profit? What happens, come February 1st? So we've created this really basic calculator for you, and we'll have it as a handout that you can get at the end of this webinar. And what you can do is you can manipulate those assumptions there and put in your return rate and your units that you've sold, and it will actually go through and adjust what your return on investment is and what your profit margin is. So this will be a really great tool that you guys can use and download. And once you do that type of research, get a better feel for what your profit is.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, the vast majority of Amazon sellers are so focused on top line revenue growth, but at the end of the day, what you really want to be focusing on is profitability. It's absolutely essential. So this is just one way of getting that going inside your team.
Yeah, and I think all this work that you're doing now is going to set you up for a much better holiday season next year. I mean, if you have to take your returns into consideration, or you may get into ordering in September, October and over forecast because you didn't take into consideration the returns for December and January. So
Yeah.
it's important to just get to the bottom of what your profit is and understand what you're doing this month and the previous month and apply that to historical trends in the next year.
Absolutely right. Like in this thing that we've got up here in the sheet, you've got percentages. I mean, you're not dealing with large percentages, but retail's all about volume and Amazon is all about volume. So it's those details, Mike, that you're bringing up. I mean, it is all about the small things, and it's small percentages of very big numbers that are going to make the difference. And I just don't think enough people track them.
Yeah, and once you actually do start tracking these numbers, there's actions you can take. So reporting is half the problem. You need to go and take action on what the data says, what the data is telling you. So a few action items you can take is you can decide, do you want to sell or not sell this item? If the return rate's really high and come February 1st you weren't profitable and the trend is pointing in line of negative profitability, you can actually just decide, I'm not going to sell this brand anymore, this SKU. You can also, break down your investments by supplier and then create a plan of attack. So once you have them segmented by, vendor or supplier or segment of your brand, you can do things like ask your supplier for a credit. We've had clients in the past where they're able to take their returned inventory and actually return it back to the supplier for credit for the next season. You can also ask your suppliers for new packaging. So if something's returned to you and the product itself is not damaged, just the packaging is, they might actually send you new packaging so you can repackage it and reship it out to Amazon.
That's a great idea. So what we're talking about there, Roberta, just to clarify for the audience, is the fact that when a return comes in, a percentage of the inventory that is received and refunded to the customer is deemed by Amazon standards as non-resellable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're highlighting as the opportunity, right? The items that Amazon has said are no longer resellable. And I think a lot of sellers, not only are not aware of the total the total returns, but it's that segment. And I think that's what you're talking about there,
yeah.
To take that inventory and you can actually repackage or refurb. For example, there's a very interesting loophole around defective electronics. If a consumer buys from Amazon and actually says that their electronic item is defective, they get to bypass the restocking fee that goes back into Amazon. So you might have items at FBA, if you're an electronic seller, that Amazon is marking not resellable when they actually are because
mm-hmm.
of that. And there's so many examples of that. Maybe items that the packaging wasn't completely damaged, or as you're pointing out there, getting new packaging. And that's a really, really important strategy. It's just waste. Those things add up.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's about just being action oriented. Like, don't just wait. Don't wait and hope. Right, in the January timeframe. It sounds like these tips, it's like do something about it. Break returns down by ask for credit.
I mean, Andy, you worked for 17 years in retail at Microsoft Xbox and Sonos. In terms of refurbished, was that a large business or?
It was a big business. Yeah, it wasn't in the beginning. So it's funny because in the Xbox business, we chose not to do it for some period of time, but just because of the sheer volume and number of returns or exchanges that you would get, turn it to its own category. And in some cases, you would refurbish that product and then sell it back through, say, a Best Buy, but then other channels are also available to you as well.
So yeah, and I think it's important because as a small business, you don't have the luxury of having divisions or
Sure.
teams that can kind of handle that. So you're very focused on growth, getting new volume for 2017, when then you might have a tremendous amount of wastage on the back end. And it's sort of getting the discipline to start a new initiative within your company. So I would urge everyone on the call to really think about that initiative, like tracking that waste.
I think it's very timely too, as it was announced this morning. The third part of the used good marketplace company Let Go just raised another $175 million. So then they're already starting to eat into eBay. And we've got folks around the room that use Let Go, but it's another channel in which to at least squeeze some bit of profit out of
recovery.
Recover, right? I think that's the name of the game, is to be action oriented, take one of these tips and then recover whatever you can. While it may not be the full margin that you look for when it was first on Amazon, don't just sit by and hope that someone comes by and picks it up.
Because you lose 100% of the margin if it's broken.
That's right.
I mean, that's the whole product.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep things going.
Yeah, another really actionable tip you can do is actually go through and audit your refunds. So as a Amazon customer, you can return your item and Amazon will credit your good, will credit you back. But if you actually don't have the goods, never make it to the fulfillment centers, as a seller, you're owed that money. So what you can actually do is compare these 3 reports we have listed here and to audit that you're actually getting back those, potential thousands of dollars that is owed to you as a seller. So this is a really great tip here. It's something that not a lot of sellers know that they can do. And again, just squeezing out some of those points on your net margin.
Yeah, and if there's ever a time of year to do it, to do a refunds recovery project, it's January and February. We built this into our software as a core tool, so it's going to be able to do all of that number crunching in our software. But if you're not, you should definitely be doing that to recover those refunds.
Up to do we mention how far back you can go? Like, what's the rules with
our software goes back 18 months, and we're going to take every single transaction and analyze it. And as part of our service, we do that with our clients. I mean, Yonny, you're very much involved with that, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like you said, we're going back to backfill 18 months of settlement reports, making sure we're getting all of that data, making sure it's as accurate as possible to especially prevent the fact that maybe Amazon did actually recover one of your orders. We're also taking those instances into account as well. So.
Right.
Yeah. Another huge question that we get is like, how do my returns affect taxes? And I think Mike, you had to touch upon this.
Yeah, and I think the answer is they affect it in a very large way. I mean, for everyone listening, I'm sure that now is the time that you're pulling together documents, maybe panicking to get everything to your accountant. And I can't stress more the importance of a professional that deals with tax and that can file tax for you. But the returns is so important because it's when you're filing taxes, you're filing tax based on the income or the profit you make. Returns is going to reduce that income. So if you go the whole year, maybe you do $1 million in sales with a 20% return rate, so $200,000, that's ultimately going to reduce those sales and get you into a lower tax rate. So it really is important to go back, audit the entire year, see when those returns are happening, so that you don't get dinged, or you don't forget about it too. I think 35% of people don't know what their return rate. That's a significant expense that you set up against your income to help you out on taxes.
And Mike, I think you're on it, and I think it's important just for the audience too. That was Mike Inagaro that was speaking, and he's leading our partnership effort at the moment. But you come from many years at Deloitte, so right. you would have seen this, in the role that you took in the tax division over at Deloitte. So I think it's excellent guidance and wisdom. Any other thoughts there?
Well, especially, it's highlighted if you are a seller that does maybe 20 to 30%. That's the norm. In November and December of your entire revenue through the year, and think about if your return rate is 15%, something like that, 10-15%. That's 10% of the largest chunk of revenue through the entire year that you might be overpaying on taxes.
Right.
So if you're not accounting for that, you're paying Amazon. Your customers are returning stuff and you're overpaying your taxes.
Right.
Again, to Mike's point, this is something that you should definitely bring up with your CPA or tax preparer, that they're going to be asking you questions like how much total inventory. The typical tax question, I believe, is, how much inventory do you have at year end? That's one very important question. The other one I think people forget about is, what is the float on those returns that might be coming back? Mm-hmm. And the problem is that can happen all the way into February And if you're filing taxes in April, you don't really have that much time.
Right.
So make sure your accountant is aware of actually the Amazon logic.
Yeah.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. So one of the most important aspects of running a successful Amazon business is to always be aware of Amazon's policy changes, especially as they relate to storage and fulfillment fees. So with the new year in full swing here, Amazon is looking to restructure a handful of their fees. So the first date we want to look at is February 22nd. So on this date, Amazon will consolidate all of their fulfillment fees into a single per unit fee, which means that you'll no longer be charged separately for order handling, pick and pack, and weight handling on the order level.
So just slow down and say that again. Like, that's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how we talked about this, yesterday, the day before. Why is that such a big deal? Like, that change, that shift to one fee. Like, that's something we need to make sure that the audience understands, right?
The key term here is per unit.
Right.
And that means that if you're a seller, Roberta, we were talking about a client who was shipping multiple units per order.
If you typically, you might have your margin might be very low after Amazon fees for one unit, but it could be a unit that people always buy multiples. So if they bought 10 or 15 of this unit, you were becoming profitable. Now you're going to have to go back and recheck that logic, because the fees, you're not going to get a break on fees if the consumer orders multiple. You're going to get charged per product instead of per order.
So it could be, depending on what type of seller you are with number of multiple units, I mean, it could dramatically change your margin. I mean, it's a really tough one. And I think the misleading statements that Amazon, well, not intentionally misleading, but basically it looks like some of the fees haven't changed that much, but that's actually big. Per unit versus per order.
Right.
It's really big. So you really have to, really have to care about that.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, because for small or large standard size units that weigh 1 pound or less, sellers actually see a decrease in their per unit fee. But large standard size units that are heavier than 1 pound will actually see a huge increase in per unit fees charged by Amazon.
So how many sellers do you think actually adjust their pricing to account for this? I mean, what?
It's less than 25%.
I mean, but like, why not? Like, why don't they?
Yeah, I think you always, as
Amazon's changing the price,
as these fees change, that's where you have to pay attention to what your margin is. And if your margin gets into the red, you need to then increase if it's you're using your price or your floor, or just your price if it's your own brand.
Right, and I think it's tough to lower prices, especially if you're in a competitive space with. I mean, take the electronic speakers, the Wi-Fi speakers. Like, there is thousands of people selling the same speaker, and if one person goes in and lowers their price, then everyone lowers their price just to get to the top of the page. So I think that's something that people have to consider too, is just lowering your price. It could have a low barrier to entry for other people.
Yeah, and I think what it ultimately does is that's why we've got the USB stick there and the big giant teddy bear, right? I also think it really helps you think very seriously about what you're going to actually sell on Amazon. No matter what, if you love the big bear, the economics of that just aren't going to be helpful. You want to end up selling much smaller goods, because that's the way in which Amazon is kind of having you think about things.
And Andy, since you've worked at some of the best retail companies in the world. I mean, how important is physical size and floor space metrics? I mean, it's very interesting that now this is applying to small retailers.
Well, I think so. What you're referencing, in traditional brick and mortar, again, if you're Curry's or Best Buy or Target, whatever it might be, the most important metric when it comes to space management or return on investment is what's called GMROF, which is gross margin return on floor space. So, because it's the hardest thing to change, right? So if you've got 1 square meter, how can you make that as productive as possible? It's the same thing at Amazon. You only have a certain amount of space, both in the warehouse as well as on that web page itself. So how do you make that as productive as possible?
But if you're Microsoft or Sonos, or in your previous role, you had to make those decisions. I think one of the toughest things as a small retailer or a medium-sized retailer, growing retailer on Amazon, is you basically make a decision. Do I sell on Amazon, and do I not sell on Amazon. If you sell on Amazon, Amazon dictates the rules.
Yep.
So it's sort of like you're on. I think there's so much autopilot mentality, and that's what I want to urge on the call for the audience is to really you've made the decision on Amazon to sell on Amazon, but you have to take the responsibility and the discipline to make the decision. And as I said, on a large company, you have to
resources.
do that. Yeah.
And I think what Amazon is actually doing with these new policies is it's almost helping you make that decision. So they're actually incentivizing you to sell smaller items quickly and decentivizing you to sell larger items slowly. And Yonny, you'll get into that with that next fee that starts March 1st, which is the increase in storage fees.
Yeah, so the next noteworthy date on March 1st is going to be the monthly storage fee for standard size items. So they will be increasing from 54 cents per cubic foot to 64 cents per cubic foot, actually. So it's going to be really important to remember that the increase in monthly storage fees here will only affect standard size items in fulfillment centers during the months January through September. So nevertheless, this means that you'll have to pay more attention to your aged inventory because the costs that you will incur from stale products are actually going to be higher than ever before. So before we go to the next slide, let's talk about July 19th. So this summer, Amazon will be increasing how often sellers are asked to send items to multiple locations. So when you create a shipment, there will be an option to use Amazon's default fulfillment center recommendations, or you can use inventory placement service. Now, to be very clear here, Amazon will always allow you to use their inventory placement services. So if you decide to ship to fewer fulfillment centers, you can totally do that, except the only difference now is that you're going to be charged to do that. So now let's look at different reports in Seller Central that can help you manage your long-term storage.
So Yonny, in terms of private label sellers, thinking about that, these adjustments, I mean, this isn't just for resellers, is it? Because I think, you and I were talking about this as we were preparing about the emphasis around the packaging. Right. And that's just a significant factor. And what we were discussing is the fact that as a private label seller, these changes in storage fees and fulfillment fees are going to mean it's important to bear in mind what type of packaging that you're getting from your manufacturers. For example, we talked about that guy that had the option of actually, they were working with a Chinese manufacturer that he was going to put the product in a box, and they actually chose to put it in a drawstring bag so they could actually shrink the size of the overall footprint and then lower the fee every time. So I think that's really important. As a private label seller, you tend to think less, I think, about these smaller fees. But actually it matters, because if you produce a tremendous amount of inventory and you're using large packaging, that's going to make a massive impact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you make changes to your product packaging and you cut those costs there, you don't have to compromise your price too. You don't have to lower price significantly just to stay, or increase price just to stay ahead of the fees. You're cutting back on saving for packaging.
And this is like what, again, going back to, the world's best retail companies, packaging is critical as well. Yeah. I mean, it's just another element that, you focus so much on the product. Packaging is very relevant.
Great. So the first report that we're going to look at is the long-term storage fees report. So this helps you estimate which of your products will be hit with long-term storage fees come February 15th. And the second is going to be the monthly storage fees report. And this will basically help you do two things. So it's going to help you gain visibility into which of your products are costing you the most in fees, and also help determine your total monthly storage expenses. So there's a third one going on here, and I think this is actually really, really important, because the inventory age report helps you prioritize your inventory. So first, you can focus on products that are more than a year old, and the reason you want to target these is because these are going to be the products that will be hit with that $22.50 rate come February 15th. And then you kind of want to take that second priority and target the 6 to 12 month products that have been sitting in your inventory for 6 to 12 months, because those are going to also be hit with a rate, except it will only be a little lower at $11.25 per cubic foot.
Yeah, and that could be the equivalent of thousands of dollars of storage fees. So what I recommend for our clients to do is to take that list of, what's 365 plus, what's 180 plus, and then, segment it by, supplier or group of inventory. And then you can see, what you can do from there. Yonny's going to talk about different ways to liquidate, but you can even, ask those suppliers to return for credit the same way you could do that with your returns. Your suppliers might actually take back inventory that's just not moving.
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to construct a successful liquidation plan, you can first prioritize your inventory by age, kind of like what we were talking about before. So after you group your inventory by age, then you want to determine what you want to do with your stale products. So now maybe you'll be able to decrease prices, and if you can, that's great. And that's a great opportunity to increase sales traction. But I think there's a great question, like what if you can't, right? So if that's the case, your next decision is to really determine whether or not you want to dispose or remove your products from FBA. And to simulate this, run through a very quick example. So let's say that you have 10 standard size toys that have been sitting in storage for 6 months, right? So if you choose to return these products, you'd get hit with $5 in total fees. But if you decide to dispose them, you'll only get hit with $1.50. Now, again, maybe you're probably asking, like, why would you ever pay Amazon to dispose of your products? Well, this actually brings me to the third point. We always want to be assessing and reassessing your profitability. So let's say that your stale toys are already priced low to begin with. So lowering them any further isn't really an option. So if I remove them from FBA, then I'll still have to deal with them at some point. And if I can only sell on Amazon, then this is a problem for me. So it's actually much more beneficial for you to pay Amazon to dispose of them. Now, the fourth part is straightforward. We want to be driving sales through sponsored products and lightning deals, or you can use other external marketing efforts like Facebook ads, Google ads, and Instagram advertising. And the final important step is going to be auction sites, for example. So liquidation.com is a platform that allows you to give professional buyers an opportunity to buy your products, or you can also look at other alternate channels like Walmart, eBay, or maybe even your own site to liquidate your products.
How effective is sponsored products for liquidating inventory? I mean, what's our take on that? Have we got some feedback from the audience?
So I think it's really important to do that kind of in tandem with decreases in prices. So the most successful resellers, from my point of view, are the people that put heavy bid adjustments, so increase their bids as high as possible within a region of a positive amount, right? But at the same time, we want to be decreasing your prices on your product listings, because so in tandem, those kind of work towards the same goal of increasing your sales
But
traction.
resellers, I think, traditionally have looked at sponsored products as more of a brand tool. Why would you ever promote a product that could be sold by other sellers? But I think there's an interesting fact. You don't get charged per click unless you're winning the buy box, and that's an interesting distinction. So it's almost a no-brainer as long as you're saying, Yonny, managing your profitability, right?
I think it depends what the data says as well. When you're analyzing your aged or unsold inventory, you can see how the sales rank is trending. So if your sales rank is quite high and your product's not being discovered, you might invest in sponsored ads to build that sales rank up and gain some visibility to get the inventory to turn over. Whereas if it's already in demand but your product is not selling, you might weigh heavier on price to get some buy box exposure.
Yeah, and I think there's a fine line too with utilizing sponsored ads for liquidating aged inventory. That inventory already has a really low conversion rate, and if you put into sponsored ads and you're placing it at the top of the page and sellers or customers don't continue to purchase that product, you're just going to continue to hurt your conversion rate even more. So Roberta talked about conversion rate earlier, so that's something to think about.
You've got one other slide.
Yeah, so inventory turnover is arguably the most important metric listed here. So in my experience, inventory turns are the lifeblood for any of our most successful retailers. It tells you really how many times in a calendar year you sell through your inventory investment. So for example, if your average DOI or days of inventory is 120 days, that means that you turn your inventory 3 times a year. So as you're really tracking these 3 metrics here, you'll be able to avoid poor investments in SKUs that take a long time to turn over, and which will allow you to be much more apt to reinvest in your most efficient and highly demanded SKUs. So I think now we're going to hand it over to Mark.
Yeah, so Mark, that's your picture up there. We've got a very interesting way in which we thought about this. I know we had discussed this over the last couple of days, but there's so many questions out there as it relates to the world that you play in. And so what we did over the last several weeks, I suppose, is to work with our clients to understand what are the top 5 or 6 questions, pain points that are really driving you crazy, and then put those over the fence to Mark. So Mark, if you're ready, we'll fire the first question at you and have you be able to address the first one.
Yep, ready to go. Happy to be here.
Well, thanks for coming. Yeah. So the first one is, why is January such an important month when it comes to sales tax? We touched on that a little bit, but you're the expert. I mean, you tell us why this is so important.
So it's important for a couple reasons. One, almost every single business that has to file a sales tax return during a year has a deadline in January. And the reason is because if you're a monthly filer, then you have a deadline to pay December sales tax. If you're a quarterly filer, you're filing Q4. If you're a semi-annual filer, you're paying for the second half of last year. Then if you're an annual filer, you've got to file your 2016 return. There are very few exceptions of folks who are complying that don't have a deadline. New York quarterly filers come to mind as one of those few exceptions. So it's a very, very popular month. It's the equivalent of April for income tax, where pretty much everybody is filing. The other reason why it's an important month that we've seen at our company is because this is the time of year when people are thinking about what do they want to get done this year, and for a lot of folks it's okay, they're going to bite the bullet and become sales tax compliant. So they maybe have gotten to some stage of scale and that they are feeling like there's too much to risk now, and they want to be compliant from this point going forward. So they're spending a lot of time trying to figure out what exactly it takes to get compliant. And we hear from those folks a lot. Just, okay, I'm at the beginning of the learning curve. Get me up to speed. Tell me what it is, exactly what I need to do to get to the end point, which is I just want to be filing returns, and preferably would love to pass this off to someone so I can focus on the fun stuff like growing my business.
So Mark, from a Amazon seller standpoint, I know this from helping so many sellers over the last few years, and I was an Amazon seller back in 2003 when this just was a non-issue. So I know right now, if you're in Seller Central, there is a setting in your preferences under tax settings. So I want to sort of ask a question for you about the compliance piece. Now, if you've got those settings completely switched off and you're not taking any sales tax, if you like, through Amazon Seller Central, I think the vast majority of sellers feel like, okay, I'm not asking Amazon in my settings to take any sales tax from my customers. Therefore, I'm not, quote, at risk, or there's no issue in terms of compliance. I mean, you mentioned that people are really thinking about being compliant. I mean, I guess we're talking about putting those settings on. Can we talk about that a bit? I mean, I know that that's something that really stresses people out.
Sure. So, we do hear from a pretty good percentage of folks who think that Amazon is taking care of all of this for them, and unfortunately, that's not true. So, to collect sales tax, the good news is Amazon has, for all the marketplaces that we deal with and that we have relationships with, and probably even the ones that we don't, Amazon has the most robust tax collection service for its third-party sellers. The bad news is they don't really support it well, and they don't even tell you really when to turn it on or how to turn it on. And even though it's actually a pretty simplistic form to fill out, you'd be surprised at how many people get it wrong and are collecting taxes inaccurately.
But if you sorry to interrupt, I just want to clarify that point. So if you've got the setting off and you're not collecting tax, and I think, Roberta, we were talking about this with some customers, if you're not collecting tax in Seller Central as your settings, are you still out of compliance?
Yeah, so I mean, everybody who has an Amazon business is selling something online. It has, and I think we have a slide on Nexus here, I believe. They're required to, there it is, they're required to collect sales tax on items that are shipped to customers in their state. So, and that's because they have Nexus in their state. So if they are not collecting items, not collecting tax on those items that are shipped to customers in their state, then yeah, they're out of compliance, and technically should be paying that money to the state out of pocket. So let me back up and just talk about Nexus, because it's the $50,000 word when it's really why anybody listening would have to or should care about sales tax. So basically, Nexus is a word we've probably all heard of, and basically what it means is that your business has some type of connection to a state where the state says, hey, look, according to our laws, you're supposed to comply with our sales tax laws. Now remember, there's no federal legislative body when it comes to sales tax. There is no IRS. So what we're left with is this chaotic system where it's state by state. States have to make decisions around, do we have sales tax or not? Most of them do. And if so, we have to write our own laws. So we have 45 states plus the District of Columbia, who are essentially their own countries. They all have their own definitions of nexus. They all have their own definitions of what's taxable and what's not. They all set their own rates, set their own sourcing for when those rates are activated, and on and on down the line. So a long-winded way to get to an answer here is say, if you're not doing anything in Amazon, at the very least, you are failing to collect taxes on items shipped to customers in your state, and you should at the very least be doing that.
We've got actually just reading the questions coming from the audience. Andrew, obviously going to be very confidential with this, and I want to just clarify with the audience that everything is completely confidential, all the polls and all the questions. But if someone's asking for past non-compliance and someone wants to come on and become compliant, is there any penalty for past non-compliance?
Sure. So really important question, one that we get all the time. So when you make the decision to comply, ultimately, in a perfect world, you'd be complying from day one, and I understand for a whole host of reasons why most of us don't do that. So here we are, we've made the decision to comply. We do have a past history with the state. Now, when the first step to becoming compliant is getting a sales tax license, which is basically your permission to collect sales tax from residents of that state. When you get that license, you have to make a declaration of when your first sale was made to someone in that state. So obviously, if you say, well, we've been selling in your state for 2 years, then that opens the door to the state saying, oh, really? Well, okay, tell us more, because we would like to have you pay us what should have been collected over those 2 years. Now, not everybody's truthful with their answer there. Some people say, well, no, I never sold, and I'm starting tomorrow. For what we've seen in our experience, for sellers who really aren't at any sort of scale, they probably get away with it. But for larger sellers, definition of larger is kind of a gray area. This is a really important decision for them, and we recommend probably should be truthful. There is an opportunity here to sign with the state what's called a voluntary disclosure agreement, a VDA, which basically says, hey, look, yep, I have history with you guys, with your state. I probably should have collected tax. I didn't for whatever reason. The reason's not important. Let's come to some deal here, which says I will pay some portion of what should have been collected, and you agree as the state never to come after me for back taxes that I should have collected. And we highly recommend in this case to have, per an earlier point made today, to have a tax professional handle this entire process for you, because where we have seen retailers get into trouble is trying to handle this on their own, and they've made costly mistakes. So at the end of the day, it should be a pretty smooth process, but I highly recommend a tax pro takes care of this for you. If you're looking for recommendations, we have really good relationships with some of the top firms in the country who can take care of this for you.
That's amazing, Mark, and you've
Just reach
got.
out to us.
And I mean, we've looked at your, it's an amazing partnership between our two companies. You've got some amazing information on your website, tons and tons of stuff. So everyone should look at that. Just one quick clarification question, since what is Nexus? We have an audience question. Is an FBA center considered a Nexus?
Yeah, so great follow-up question. What triggers Nexus is a natural follow-up. So things like where your business is based, if you have retail presence, if you have an employee in a state, that'll give you Nexus. Things like trade shows, depending on the state, can give Nexus. Drop shipping is a very common trigger of Nexus. And then the one that sort of makes everybody sweat when it comes to FBA is inventory lying in a warehouse in another state. So almost all of the states that have Amazon warehouses have written into their laws to say inventory being stored in that state is the same as an employee, is the same as if you had a retail presence, if the same as, if you were living in our state, that does trigger Nexus.
Well, that's sorry to keep interrupting you, Mark, but these questions that are coming in are amazing. This is someone asking, how about Amazon sellers who don't reside in the US?
So unfortunately for them, these laws apply as well. So the state of California, for example, doesn't care if you are a seller in Texas or Rhode Island or in Germany and you have stuff stored in Amazon's warehouses in their state. The laws apply to you as well.
Interesting. That's a really good one.
So, Mark, another one that we had captured prior to getting everybody together, how does Amazon calculate and collect the tax from me? I think we touched a little bit, at least in terms of the settings, but anything that you wanted to build on there?
Yep. So, as you guys mentioned, they have a paid service. It's unfortunately you have to pay for it, but it is very robust. Getting it turned on the right way is super important. The other thing I'll mention in terms of how robust is it, you can actually set product tax codes for each of your products. So why that's important is because then Amazon can tell the difference between if you're selling, a piece of furniture versus a clothing item versus a grocery item. So in real time, Amazon is doing the calculation to figure out, oh, okay, I'm selling a clothing item to state X. That item is not taxable in that state, so we're not going to collect the tax. The other thing that Amazon does is it collects local taxes, which not all platforms do. And some platforms are limited to just state or flat taxes, which doesn't allow you to collect accurately.
And Mark, just a question, you've got that list on the website, so there's some sort of matrix there where folks could be able to access that?
Yeah, so we've got plenty of information in terms of Amazon sales tax settings. I believe we have a link that we're going to be posting here. You can also go to FBASalestax.com. That also has a download that we'll email to you that basically has a cheat sheet that'll show you exactly how to fill out that table on Amazon, how to collect taxes accurately.
And I'm actually going to post a link to the Seller Central URL. So every Seller Central user who's on the call can click that, and they'll have to log in, but it will take them to their tax screen. So I've done that.
Cool.
Thanks, Al. A couple other questions. We're just got a few more minutes here to go. Does Amazon charge a fee for collecting tax on my behalf? Again, you touched on that a little bit. Is there a percentage there, or something we can be more specific just for the audience?
Yeah, unless they've changed it, it's 2.9% of the taxes collected. So, and the other kind of very common question there is, when do I get the taxes that have been collected by Amazon? It's basically lumped in with your sales, so it's not separated in any way. So for some of our customers, for example, they don't even realize that they're getting the tax, when they're getting payments from Amazon. So just keep that in mind as well.
Okay. Okay, a couple others, and I think we'll get to the end here. When should FBA sellers think about sales tax compliance? I mean, you covered some of that once again, kind of, when you're filing monthly or quarterly, whatever that may look like, but maybe another build there on top of that question, and we got a poll to follow up as well.
Yeah, so this is the most common question because this is basically sellers asking, should I care about this or not? So what we recommend, and again, it's just our recommendation, our whole philosophy is around trying to give sellers the education that they need so that they can make these decisions on their own. We recommend at the very least complying in your home state. It's the easiest dots for that state to connect. They see that you're paying income tax, you have a business registered there. They're the ones who most likely notice, hey, this seller are they collecting tax? Are sales tax? Are they complying the way they should be? So that should be your first step. In terms of expanding your compliance portfolio to other states, we see people fall into two categories, and it's firmly like 50-50. And by the way, we're not even going to debate like the laws. So this is taking the laws as they are and we all agree that the laws say you're supposed to be compliant in states where you have nexus, and that's caused by inventory. The first camp says, I don't like the idea of not complying in any state where I should be. I don't care if I only make $50 worth of sales to Texas a year, I'm going to comply. It just makes me feel better. And that's a much more conservative approach, and I understand that. The one that is much more realistic, in my opinion, the one that I would fall into, is they take a wait-and-see approach. So they say, okay, I understand what the law says, but I am only selling $50 into Texas a year. That probably comes out to $8 that I was supposed to collect. I'm not going to go through the time and the effort to go ahead and comply in Texas because they probably are not going to care about my $8. If they do and they come after me, I can afford that $8, right? At the same time, I'm going to keep an eye on it. So if that $8 in sales tax that I should have collected turns into some number that makes me feel uncomfortable, and for everybody it's different, $80, $800 or more, then I'm going to pull the trigger and go ahead and comply in Texas and use that on a state-by-state case basis. And by the way, that's one of the tools that we offer is we show Amazon sellers where they have nexus. We also show them how much tax they should have collected in each of those states for that exact purpose, to help them make that decision of, okay, I'm going to keep my eyeball on a state and I'm going to go ahead and comply once that number that I should have collected reaches a level that makes me feel like I'm taking too much of a risk not complying in the state.
Yeah, Mark, I think that's super helpful, and I think as a resource for the group, it's clear you all are doing this for thousands of customers, and so I think we've got a couple of things here as we wrap. I think the first is a poll, and the poll is for the group I think it's in line with what we're talking about here. Is who do you turn to or where do you turn to for tax advice? I'm curious. Let's see how the poll results shake out here. It's already starting to feel like folks have got a tax preparer or a CPA, and that they're turning to, which is smart. I think Mike had mentioned that earlier. And as the poll
are
build,
they? Sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Are they a Amazon specific tax preparer? That's what we were discussing last time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Looking at this, I mean, I think it's very important for the tax preparer to know exactly which reports they should be looking at. Those details that Mark's talking about with respect to Amazon. I mean, and that's quite difficult. I mean, you've got to have to find a tax preparer that you trust and work with well, who also understands the Amazon beast, which is, that's what we do every single day. It's difficult.
It is indeed. And I think, for Mark, as we're looking at the results here, the poll's closed now, but 24% choose to use TaxJar content, right? So that's special, right? I think it's a good thing that we're having this conversation and the group is using that.
And I love the TaxJar approach. I mean, there are companies out there, and Mark, I really, really respect how your approach to all of this, who kind of scare the sellers and use these sort of strong arm tactics to say, come and use our service. And I love that about TaxJar, and I urge everyone to take a look at the website and all the free content, and it shows in these numbers.
Yeah, and Mark, listen, I want to thank you and Jennifer and Ryan and team. As the partnership continues to evolve, there's such goodness here that we can offer to our customers and to folks that aren't customers yet. We're happy to continue the partnership. So just simply want to thank you again. And as a reminder, which we will share, Mark and the team have been kind enough to offer this audience a discount code. So I think that's super important given it is January.
And for the attendees and of course our clients who work with Teikametrics, it's a tight partnership with TaxJar as well. And all of these questions, I mean, there's just been so many questions that are coming through. I mean, this is the type of service that Teikametrics provides. So we're honored to partner with TaxJar.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Al. And just in wrapping, I think Yonny, you got a couple of closing slides here, and then we'll let folks go. We're just at time now, so over to you, Yonny.
Yeah, so I mean, we really did talk about this already. I know Alistair and Roberta had a lot to say about it, but just to reiterate here, you really always want to be looking at your historical performance to inform your quarterly or monthly goals come 2017, kind of based off of the trends that you've seen historically. So we can kind of wrap through that there. And then to purchase your upcoming and seasonal products, you need capital, right? So it's going to be really important for you to get your spring orders ready. And the first aspect of that is, like I said, to free up your capital. And then the second point here is to really just be conscious of your lead time. So as I'm sure many of you are well aware, the lead time for all your products will always have an impact on when you should expect your products to arrive at FBA. And finally, this concept of return rate, right? So it's going to be very vital that you take this in consideration when you're kind of looking at the holistic view of your Amazon business. So not only should you be interested in sales revenue, right, but you should be interested in cost of goods sold. You should be interested in the rate of return per product type, advertising spend, inventory turns, shipping costs, etc. So by keeping these necessary metrics, hopefully you will have the best year in 2017 for your business.
We've also got a webinar coming up on the 25th of January with Mike Ziegler. He was one of the founding members of the Amazon sponsored ads team. And we've got a very strong relationship with him, and it's such a hot topic, has been for some period of time. So please do join us on the 25th, and that's at 3 o'clock. So
we're going to share the links for that.
Yep, we're going to share the links. We're going to share the links now. And as we said before, we're always engaged with the audience, so we're going to make sure we answer the questions that are most important to you. And then as a follow-up to this webinar, we'll do our best to make sure we capture the questions anonymously and be able to make sure that we address those as well.
I mean, there's tons of questions. I wish we could go through them all. I mean, a lot of them are just, ones I really feel for in terms of the audience. I mean, people are writing in saying, I got this report, but when I actually checked it out, Amazon said this and charged me this. And I think that relates a lot to the webinar we got on February 22nd. It's going to be how to lower your FBA costs, and we're going to talk about investment risk, digging into all those details around those costs, and it's going to be a much more detailed look at that. So all the questions that are coming through, we'll go through those, and of course, we just want to listen to as many people as possible and help. So visit our website, and we will love to engage with you.
Yeah, if they have those questions and they want to chat with one of us, just go to our website, request a demo, and we'll schedule some time to chat with you.
Yeah, it's awesome. So everybody, once again, thanks again, Mark and team. Thank you. Again, thanks to the audience for making the time. I just know how precious that is for everybody, and look forward to seeing everybody next time. So thanks again.